The Field of 68 Media Network presents Red is the New Orange, a Syracuse basketball podcast.
Vince intercepts a pass, breakaway for the freshman guard, he flies and slams! Aerial assault from Judah Mintz.
Looking to go back door to Bell, they get it to a near corner three, knocks it down! Chris Bell, the sharpshooter.
Bringing you everything you need to know out of the 315.
Up top, Williams surges ahead, up with the right hand and in. A pretty up and under move from Benny Williams to beat his man.
Over to Taylor, he skips into the lane, puts up a floater, it drops in.
Let's get it started with your host, Ian Unsworth and Johnny Gadamowitz.
Well, 2 games in the books, 2 wins for Syracuse men's basketball, but game number 2, not so pretty. We welcome you on into another edition of Red is the New Orange. As always, Johnny and Ian with you. Happy to have you along for the ride. Before we get into it, now's a good time for us to plug our socials. Go give us a follow, F68_Cuse, part of the Field of 68 podcast network. You can also follow them on Twitter. That's where we live stream all these episodes. You're probably watching there right now, to be honest. So if you're already there, hey, if you're not watching there, if you're on YouTube, if you're listening on Megaphone, make sure you go give them a follow because that is the easiest way to keep tabs instantaneously right when things come out. So Syracuse does defend the dome. Defend, I say, in air quotes, a 74-72 victory over the Colgate Raiders in a game that was not very pretty. Now, I would be a total hypocrite to come on here and say that I'm very upset because if you heard our last episode, I very much took the standpoint of a win is a win. But Ian, I think after watching that performance, if you're still telling yourself a win is a win, maybe you're not really seeing the full picture.
Johnny, I'm wearing a shirt from Orange Crate. It's got a smiling pizza on it. And right now, this pizza is the happiest thing in Syracuse. You can't be running through the fields with rose-colored glasses on after watching what we saw on Tuesday night. From a defensive perspective, that was atrocious. Not because Colgate shot the lights out, which we've seen them do in the past. 10 for 27 from 3. The Raiders have made 18 in the past. The 3 ball was not the end-all be-all. It was guarding the ball and guarding the paint. Syracuse did not do either. Jalen Cox got whatever he wanted, led the entire game with 21 points on 20 shots, let alone. And these were good shots. Cox got into the paint very often. Syracuse left Lampkin on an island and pick and roll switches, and he was lost. Half the time, Lampkin didn't know what was going on in the pick and roll coverage. There was no help behind him. And Cox, who was only a starter for half of last year, just dipped and swerved through Syracuse's defense. 20 shots usually is not a problem. 21 points, 20 shots is usually not a problem. But these were just high percentage shots that Jalen Cox missed. And the rest of Colgate's team did the same sort of thing. Matt Park, Eric Devendorf kept on bringing it up. The Raiders missed open layups. You watch that and you say, holy cow, this team is going to get rocked in a few weeks.
It felt like Colgate gave the game away. Yeah. All you have to do is go watch the last possession of the game if you haven't seen it. If not for a fumble out of bounds, it easily could have been a loss rather than a win. And we could be talking
blue
about
from Nicholas Louis Jacques.
Yeah. Either way, Colgate does actually outscore Syracuse in the second half, albeit only by a point.
And Syracuse had an 11-point lead early on in the second half.
Yep.
It vanished.
4 different Raiders in double figures, but seemingly, evidently, Red Autry, the headman, not really thinking that a performance like this is all bad. He was willing to take the glass half full approach.
Just took some terrible shots and got it away. You know, that got away from us. I took Eddie out and we just lost the lead. That can't happen. But the one thing I'll say is, you know, for everyone, we are playing at a higher pace than people have seen in a long time here, right? 20 more possessions than what we've normally played. So the 60s, that's going to be very tough to do, all right? But at the end of the day, you know, where we didn't do a good job of was transition defense, right? They got 22 points in transition defense. That's where we didn't do a good job at, all right? And talk about this, 45 rebounds. We haven't had 45 rebounds in a long time.
Now, it's a fair point. It's twofold, though, because the 45 rebounds are great, and no one is going to give you a tough time for getting after it on the glass. But how many times, Ian, and this ties back to your point earlier, Syracuse's defense, particularly closing out on shooters, was atrocious. Now, maybe that's because they are making a little bit of a more cognizant effort to be well positioned to get after it on the glass. And that's fine if you want to do that to an extent. But to give Colgate open look after open look after open look, just so that you can pad your rebounding totals a little bit, I'm sorry, when you get into ACC play, that is not going to fly.
I think Red Autry coming out defensive, trying to protect his players, missed the point in his opening statement. And this was the end of his opening statement before the press conference was opened up to questions. He really missed the point. People aren't complaining about the fast break defense necessarily. It wasn't like, I don't think anyone cares if Syracuse wins 90 to 88 or 60 to 58, quite frankly. The problem is the pace that the game was played at, since we're talking about pace, since Red Autry brought up pace of play, it didn't favor Syracuse at all, period. Colgate got up and down the floor. Syracuse played the entire game in the half court. Only 2 transition points. And it was on a Chris Bell layup. So if Syracuse is a run and gun team that doesn't run and gun, but yet plays at a higher tempo, what are we doing here?
So then that begs the question, do you think this is not really a run and gun team and we were kind of duped in a sense that it is going to be a more slow you down, grind it down kind of offensive? I don't think so.
Work.
I don't.
It did not work. They spent most of the second half playing in the half court. Everyone stood around. They threw the ball to the Lampkin. They threw it to Elijah Moore and said, please get us a bucket. And as you said, Johnny, Colgate scored more in the second half than Syracuse did. This has to be a run and gun team. But the problem is, if we're running and gunning for 40 minutes, people get tired. You have to get bodies in and out of the game. And right now, Syracuse isn't doing that. It's not mass hockey substitutions. It's one man here, 2 guys there. There has to be more shuffling and more variations in and out. And that's also tough when your best ball handler fouls out and picks up his 4th foul with 5 minutes to go in the game.
Yeah, that was
really puts you in a bind.
Yeah, that was something that I think if this game taught us anything, it's that J.J. Starling's importance, I think, is going to be even more than any of us thought. And that's saying a lot, because there are some people and majority of people who thought this is J.J.'s team. He's the guy. I think we almost kind of undervalued how crucial he is going to be to this year's group. You brought up the 2 fast break points compared to 22 for Colgate. Raiders almost kind of beat the Orange at their own game.
Exactly.
Gave them a little bit of a taste of their own medicine. Red wants to talk about the rebounding, and that's fine. You have 11 offensive rebounds, that's great. But if you only have 8 second chance points on them, is that something to really hang your hat on? Probably not. So look, I get it. It's early. You're still feeling things out. You're still trying to find that identity. But let's not try to fit a square peg into a round hole here. We know what this team is. Well, I shouldn't say we know what this team is, but we know how this team needs to play if they're going to reach their full potential. And yesterday, they didn't play that way at all.
Let's give credit to Matt Langle, too. Colgate did a great job of getting back, setting up, stopping Syracuse with a couple of different defensive looks. He is a great coach. Not just good. He's not just someone that's having a little run. No, he is a fantastic coach, and he's doing it with less than he has before. This team is easily not one of his most talented teams. It's clear to say that. And they still almost won. Still should have won. So credit to Matt Lankel. But again, just like with the Lemoyne game, even though Colgate probably beats Lemoyne 8 times out of 10, but this still is not a game on paper that's close. And because Syracuse turns the ball over early, can't start strong, lacks the defensive communication and switchability to stop smaller guards and quicker players, it's just continuous falter and then a need for heroic plays on the offensive end. And good thing Chris Bell hasn't had a stinker yet. And good thing Lampkin did not commit a single foul in this game. That's an eye popper. And was, even down the stretch when he looked kind of gassed, willing and competing down low and working in the post to get points. Because there were times when Syracuse's offense looked completely diminished and completely out of it.
And not only that, what if Jair Davis doesn't get 9 rebounds? What if J.J. Starling doesn't knock down a couple of threes? Like, this is one of those games where if one individual has a marginally worse performance than they did, that's what turns a win into a loss. It's as simple as that. And I think what really encapsulates it pretty well, Ian, is the fact that you brought up on our preview episode. Look, the last time Syracuse lost to Colgate before 2-3 years ago was when Jim Boeheim was in high school. You were so close to now dropping what would have been a third game to the Raiders
3
over
of the
course
last
of the
4,
previous 4.
and you had to win by coming back from 24 points last year.
So that's a whole separate conversation. Yeah. Obviously, you give Colgate plenty of credit, but maybe the Orange moving in the wrong direction in that regard. Either way, it is a win. Syracuse does have an opponent coming up on the schedule in Youngstown State that you would figure is an opportunity for them to sort out some of these kinks before we do a full shift to looking towards Saturday. Ian, any closing thoughts as far as this Colgate game is concerned? Because we learned a lot.
Wasn't good. We didn't learn good things, but we learned. Donnie Freeman and Jaquan Carlos, again, both not really doing a whole lot.
2 games in a row for Carlos. I didn't want to bring it up too much because it is only 2 games and it's new team, new teammates, new coach. But if we hop on here next Monday and it's a similar final line, 30 minutes, only 1 made bucket from the floor. I know he's not your alpha scorer per se, but you got to give me a little something more offensively, no?
If he's going to handle the ball, he has to be some sort of threat. Freeman gets a lot more rope, and he's still out there. He was competing for every rebound, and he was hustling up and down the floor. But you expect the growing pains to happen, and since he's not hitting his ceiling right away, it's a big reason why Syracuse is going to struggle in games like this. Elijah Moore, first guard off the bench in this contest. Would think that means he's just had a better week of practice than Lucas Taylor. That's probably going to be the determiner. As Jim Boeheim told us years back, Stevens' starting lineups don't depend on who's got the best scoring average or who's been here the longest. It's just about who's got the hot hand.
Yep.
That day, that week, and especially with dudes that seem to be on the same playing field and very even skill levels, Moore and Taylor will probably go back and forth all year long. Moore is not afraid to shoot, but not all his shots are good shots.
Which I think you can make the case for both of their developments, probably for the best, right? Nothing wrong with a little healthy competition, battle for minutes, and that appears to be, again, at least in the early goings, what we have here between Taylor and Moore. I think my closing thought with this Colgate thing is that, look, nobody expected this to be a seamless transition. This is a new team, right? Everybody knows that. This was not going to happen overnight. But I think at the same token, you hoped that just from a pure talent standpoint, there would be enough there where these games would be a little bit more comfortable than they have been.
You think you really dig in the portal, right? You get a couple recruits that are top 100 guys, right? This is not the last of the Boeheim classes where these guys were kind of unknown, unheralded. Oh, he's got this trait, he's got that trait, but really not super athletes. These are dudes that you expected to contribute right away. And right now the overall sum of this group is not enough.
It is still a 2-0 record. Orange are hopeful it will be 3-0 after this weekend. And now we will chat a little bit of Youngstown State, preview that matchup. Again, that is at the Dome this weekend. I believe they bumped it up an hour or moved it back an hour because of the football schedule. That's neither here nor there, but we'll get you ready for that after this quick word.
As you guys know by now, we've partnered with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68 each and every week of the college basketball season. We have a special offer that will be available starting on Tuesday, January 9th and running through Monday, February 12th, the morning after Super Bowl 58. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, in honor of the big game, you can use the bonus code FIELD158 and you'll get $158 in free bets on your first wager with BetMGM, regardless of whether or not you win that first bet. Here's how you make it work. Download the BetMGM app. Sign up using the bonus code FIELD158. Deposit at least $5 and place your first wager on any game. You'll receive $158 in bonus bets regardless of the outcome of your bet. Just make sure that you use that bonus code FIELD158 when you sign up. And remember, BetMGM is now available under one wallet in select states. As a New Jersey resident, this is super convenient when I have to go cover games in New York or Philly, which happens quite a bit. When you cross state borders, you just log into your existing account and fire away. You don't have to create separate accounts in each state. It's easy, it's simple, it's clean. And most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the heart of the college basketball season. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odd boosts, and my favorite, a nice juicy parlay boost. So download the BetMGM app and sign up today. Field 158.
Well, part two of our Friday episode, and as you can see, we had a little bit of a wardrobe change. Ian is getting ready to go call a game. I am in my car in my pajamas, and we have the pleasure of now being joined by WAER sports staff member Max Gifford, current Syracuse junior, who is, as they say, boots on the ground with this Syracuse basketball program. Max, thanks for coming on, man. How's everything?
It's going great. Pleasure to be alongside both of you today, and thanks for inviting me on.
The pleasure is all ours. I want to start with this, Max, because you have the luxury of something that me and Ian both do not, and that is being in Central New York and being in the 315 during the course of the season thus far. From what you've seen and from what you've been a part of as far as early season observations are concerned, from an in-person standpoint, what's been kind of some of your early season takeaways as far as the vibe is concerned surrounding this Syracuse team?
Yeah, Johnny, it might be a little harsh right now, but from what I've seen so far in the two contests I've actually gotten to go watch, I was at the Colgate game and I was at the Clarion exhibition. This team defense is awful. That's as plain and simple as I can put it. Their defense is so bad and needs so many improvements. The transition defense, especially, Red Autry went on a whole rant about it. He lambasted the transition defense in the press conference after Colgate. But I think this team can really make its money on its offense, once the offense begins to gel, because Autry did know, still a new team. They're still finding opportunities to, figure it out and gel together. But they're only going to be as successful, I think, as they can on the defensive end. And right now, you look up and down the starting lineup and you look up and down the bench, and there's not many or any individuals that can play defense at a high level. He was praising Chris Bell for his defense. If we're at a point where Chris Bell is the best defender on this team, Syracuse is in for a rough season.
Chris Bell used to catch the short end of the stick when we were on campus. So that is a new and interesting development. All things considered, though, 2-0 still. and usually that's Johnny's line, but they're 2-0, and the Orange have Youngstown State up next. Max, I know you're pretty familiar with the Penguin program. If you don't know, Youngstown State is in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, and it's most famous for being the school that Jim Tressel coached at before going to Ohio State, and then went back to after disgracefully leaving Ohio State, and he's now their athletic director. Other than that, I mean, you couldn't pick it out on a map. You're throwing darts at the state of Ohio. Youngstown State as a team is 1-1. They've beaten Chicago State by 20, and they've lost to Ohio State by 34. Syracuse is only projected to beat them by 10 on KenPom. Max, what do you think Youngstown State can cause problems for Syracuse?
Well, when you look at it on paper, and I guess when you look at it on KenPom, I guess Youngstown State is technically the best team Syracuse has faced so far when you compare it to Lemoyne and Colgate. I'm not saying that it should be any closer because they're higher in a KenPom ranking or because they're higher in any, advanced analytics. But you're right. It's been a tale of two games with Youngstown State, playing a really, really solid game with a new head coach and Ethan Faulkner at the helm. Playing really good against Chicago State, getting a lot of new guys in the fold. I mean, there's a lot of parallels to this Youngstown State team with Syracuse and the fact that there was a lot of turnover. You had a lot of your scoring sort of leave, graduate, go to the transfer portal. You have a new coach. You have a new coach there for the Penguins, and now you really had to, then you also had to deal with a punch in the teeth going against Ohio State, which, in my opinion, is a top 5 team in the Big Ten. So I think you look at a game like that, losing by that much, maybe not the worst loss in the entire world. And especially if you watch that game, Youngstown State scored maybe 10 seconds into the game and then didn't have a point until the 13-minute mark in the first half. So, of course, they lost by that much because, well, they couldn't really score. And Youngstown State, to me, when I kind of have been watching some film from that Ohio State game, it reminded me a lot of a worse version of Colgate from last year, where they only chuck up threes, except they missed probably every single shot from beyond the arc until maybe, I don't know, past halfway into the first half. And even those weren't really going down. And you could say, sure, well, maybe there was just a lid on the basket, although half the shots weren't even close to the basket, which is what I thought was funny for a majority of the game. But Youngstown State provides a good mix of, lots of new talents, a couple returners as well. But when it comes to the Penguins, they don't really make their money from outside. So they're going to have to really force a lot of shots inside. The team actually, just like Syracuse, hasn't played great defense at all, averages over just about gives up just over about 70 points per game. So likely going to be an offensive shootout again between both of these teams. But I think for Syracuse, it has an advantage in the fact that they're a really good rebounding team comparative to Youngstown State, who is okay on the offensive rebounding end, but on the defensive end, it's been rough so far this year for the Penguins.
We should tell you that Max is not just a Youngstown State expert for no reason. He is actually the pregame, halftime, and postgame host for the broadcast coming up on WAER this Saturday. So make sure you give him 88.3 FM if you're in the Syracuse area, WAER.org if you are not in the Syracuse area. Max, I want to touch on this. You take a peek at this Syracuse schedule following Saturday's game against Youngstown State. And I don't think it's any secret that there is a little bit of an uptick in terms of level of competition. You go to Brooklyn and play Texas, then you're getting either St. Joe's or Texas Tech. You mix in a gritty Cornell program out of the Ivy League, and then all of a sudden, bam, you're in Knoxville against Tennessee. As it pertains to this Youngstown State game, do you get the sense that this is, I don't know, maybe the last game on Syracuse's schedule for a little while where they cannot really look great on the court and still manage to squeak out a win? Or I guess a better way of framing that question is, do you get the sense that if this is another close win, say 5-point Syracuse win, 3-point Syracuse win, that's a problem because of that uptick of competition that's coming right around the corner?
Yeah, Johnny, I was reading up on sort of Syracuse in the first couple of games, just sort of comparing starts to previous years and seeing, how long these other teams have taken to gel, especially these last couple of seasons with the team being so young. And, I mean, we've been talking about, two of the last three seasons they had, or three of the last four seasons, I should say, they had lost to Colgate. So it's a little bit of a different story comparative because, you're still 2-0, wins or wins at the end of the day. But the thing that stands out so far when Syracuse has played Lemoyne and Colgate is that they haven't had a run of 10-0 or more yet, which is sort of like a kill shot in basketball, in my opinion. And when you look at the grand scheme of college basketball, lots of teams really, really are successful when they can go on some of those big runs. Syracuse hasn't had a single one yet. They've been at home this entire time. And you mentioned it right after this. Well, you're going to go to Barclays. You're going to be on the road for a majority of these games and then coming home to face a Cornell team that has also played you close the last couple of seasons. You really need to figure out how to, I guess, orchestrate some sort of offensive run, get some consistency going with that offense. But also part of that offense and getting those points comes with, keeping the other team off the scoreboard as well. And I think, Red Autry mentioned it a little, and just the fact that, you know, they're a good rebounding team. They've been very, very, good at getting rebounds. They've had more success than they had in recent years. I think the stat I found was it was the first time since 2020 the Orange have had back-to-back games with 45 or more rebounds in a single game. The issue was when they were getting those rebounds on the offensive end, the shots that they were putting up weren't going in. And then on the defensive end, even if they got it, they weren't transitioning those into points afterwards. And granted, Colgate and Lemoyne played, okay defense, but Syracuse also just wasn't making their shots at the end of the day, which, I mean, you take those two variables, it doesn't add up to be very well. So I think the key, Johnny, for Syracuse in this game is trying to figure out a way to put together some sort of run. I don't think, if it's going to be close, it's going to be close. Youngstown State, they've won 20 games, back-to-back years. So they are, a team to be reckoned with out of the Horizon League. But you also have to remember this is Syracuse basketball. They're expected to beat Youngstown State. So there has to be a way to, I guess, manufacture some sort of bigger run at the end of the day that this team can go on, and in order to pull away from the Penguins.
What if it's just feed Chris Bell, give him 15 shots and see if he can heat up? That worked a couple times last year. I have no problem with that.
It's not a bad idea. You look at that Ohio State game that Youngstown State just played. That's essentially what Ohio State did. They just kept feeding they just kept feeding the wings, feeding the outside, feeding the perimeter shooters. It was working because they were making their shots. And Youngstown State on the other end, when they were flustered, they tried to force up a lot of three balls, and they weren't successful. Now, the one player that does intrigue me with Youngstown State, Gabe Dines, a guy that is 7'3", and all respect to Naheem McLeod. I mean, I think Syracuse would rather have Gabe
Has
Dines.
Naheem McLeod played a minute?
No. Honestly,
Naheem McLeod has not played a minute this year, besides the exhibitions.
Honestly, I think Gabe Dines is more of a power 4, power 5 player than Naheem McLeod is. I don't know if you guys saw on SportsCenter, this guy absolutely rejected an Ohio State three ball. Just keep in mind, this guy is 7'3", and he probably jumped all the way from the low block to the outside 3-point line and sent the ball into the crowd in maybe the span of 3 seconds. I mean, this guy has so much mobility for the fact that he's 7'3", can really, really has a really, really interesting way of getting to the outside in terms of playing defense. A lot of bigger guys, like a Naheem McLeod, like an Eddie Lampkin, they stay posted on that inside. They don't really move other than to, try to, if they're a low block man, tries to get outside. But Dines is an interesting and sort of an enigma on the fact that, he doesn't mind going outside trying to defend the three ball. He's fine on the offensive end working around the perimeter. And the fact that he's got mobility, he's got athleticism is something that, helps when you're 7'3". And honestly, it was kind of shocking that Youngstown State didn't beat him more during the game because, I mean, you've seen Naheem McLeod. I mean, if he does get the ball right near the net, all he has to do is just kind of lay it in. It's very similar with Dines for him being an inch shorter. And, the fact that he is a tremendous rim protector as well. If Syracuse puts up a lot of these, little shots that they kept putting up with offensive rebounds, you saw Jair Davis, you saw Eddie Lampkin put up, the same underhook shovel shots over and over. Even with Chris Bell put the ball on the court, he tried the same thing. Gabe Dines is going to send those away pretty quickly. Even though, he does play for Youngstown State at the end of the day, he still has mobility, still has athleticism. I mean, that's a top 20, 25 team in Ohio State he went against. And he probably had, 4 or 5 blocks just in the first half alone.
They're a very interesting name to keep an eye on. A couple others we can throw out there. Ty Harper's probably their lead guard, senior. He is one of many transfers on this unit, but he has taken 7 threes, as you mentioned, Max. He struggled, only made one of them. Youngstown State as a team shoots 20% from 3. And Nico Gillette, 6'6" wing. He'll be a slasher type that will try to get inside, but if he runs into resistance, if is a big if, but if he runs into resistance, he could struggle again from behind the arc. I think the key number here for SU is the possession length, the tempo of this game, because Youngstown State has played their offensive possessions at about 18 and a half, 19 seconds per possession, which is around 300th in the country. They are not looking to get out and run. At least they haven't been over their first 2 games. Colgate and Lemoyne have been trying to beat Syracuse at its own game. And it really worked for Colgate. But I don't know if Youngstown State, especially with a 7'3" big, is wired like that.
No, and it's a great point you make in the fact that, Syracuse or Lemoyne and Colgate both came in, I guess, with different attitudes. I mean, this is the first time Syracuse has ever faced Youngstown State. With Lemoyne, you've got a little bit of bad blood with the crosstown rivalry. With Colgate, you always know Matt Langel is going to put a good team out there. He's 4 straight years in the NCAA tournament. Colgate's always been competitive. You guys know firsthand, being at that game a couple of years ago when they shot the lights out in the dome. But you're right. I mean, when push comes to shove, this Youngstown State team, if they get flustered and the other team continues to put up shots, especially if they're prolonged possessions, I mean, I feel like in that Youngstown State Ohio State game, I kept looking down to see, okay, when's Youngstown State back on offense? And they weren't, because Ohio State just kept getting the ball. And they also kept holding on to the basketball. That was the difference. They weren't very quick possessions. They were really trying to, I guess sort of, I mentioned Dines a little, sort of work him out a little, because eventually, when you're 7'3", your body's going to wind down after a little, which is also something, I think Youngstown State could also kind of take advantage of on the Syracuse end, because you've watched Eddie Lampkin. This guy doesn't necessarily move the greatest at all, much better than Naheem McLeod did. But I mean, this guy's conditioning is not anywhere close to where it needs to be at this point in the season. So if Youngstown State, I guess Ian, you mentioned it, wants to beat Syracuse at its own game, it's almost like beating it at its own game by trying to, forcing Lampkin, forcing some of those bigger players to move, especially if you can catch these Syracuse defenders flat-footed, because you talked about some of that time of possession, and I mentioned the transition defense. I'm sure you guys talked about the transition defense as well. I mean, the fact that Syracuse got caught flat-footed so much, and it wasn't just one player, there were multiple players that got caught flat-footed. They got caught behind the play. A lot of it had to do with communication, in my opinion, not communicating on switches, not communicating on getting back, almost just watching the ball rather than watching the actual play develop. So Syracuse has got plenty to clean up on its end, and on Youngstown State's end, I mean, I think it just has to flat out make more shots. I mean, Syracuse is going to, put up an offensive shot whenever it's on the court, especially going up against sort of these teams who may not be as good as Syracuse. But on the defensive end, you can only take as much advantage of Syracuse as you can, is if you make shots and if you make them consistently.
Well, I'll say it. I think Syracuse needs a double-digit win on Saturday. I think this is a game they got to go out there and they got to replicate what Ohio State did, get right, feel good going into some much tougher competition down the road. That's Max Gifford, WAER sports staff member. Again, he'll have you for pre, half, and post on the AER broadcast, 88.3 FM Saturday. What is it, Max? A 1 p.m. tip, I believe. They shuffled it around because of football, right?
They did shuffle it around. 1 p.m. tip. It's a doubleheader on WAER. So no post, straight to Cal versus football.
Oh, there you go. I stand corrected then.
You can also make sure to join us in the double overtime until 8. Shameless plug. Triple hosting the day, so it'll be fun.
There you go. There you go. And hopping on red is the new orange as well. That's Max Gifford. Max, really appreciate the time. We will be back with you later today because if you've been paying attention in the Syracuse basketball sphere, you know that Kyan Anthony is set to make his decision this afternoon. So as soon as that decision is made, Ian and I going to hop on, give our instant reactions, whether the decision is Syracuse or USC. Then, of course, we'll be back as per usual on Monday to react to Youngstown State and preview the week ahead. But with Max and Ian, I'm Johnny saying so long. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you later today.